So let's jump in. Chapter 43, our first little mini war segment in 43 and 44 is going to occur. And then there's a little interlude in 45, and then the full-blown war chapters really get underway in chapter 46 through 62, and then the summation in 63 finishes off our book of Alma. So let's start this way. Since we're looking at our war that we're fighting being simply a lens, this book becomes a lens through which we can see our own struggles. Let's look at the premortal realm again. This war that we already fought in, where you had the two who stepped forward when the Father asked, "Whom shall I send? Here am I, send me, and the glory be thine forever. Here am I, send me, and the glory be mine forever," seeking to destroy the agency of all of God's children, being that underlying motive. Watch carefully as we pick up the story now in verse 7. See what you can see about our own struggle back then as well as today. Now this he did. This is Zarahemnah, the leader of the Lamanite army. He called Amalekites and Zoramites to be the leaders of his soldiers, and he did that to preserve their hatred towards the Nephites, that he might bring them into subjection to the accomplishment of his designs. For behold, his designs were to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites. This he did that he might usurp great power over them, and also that he might gain power over the Nephites by bringing them into bondage. That's the opposite of liberty and freedom and agency, seeking to destroy the agency of God's children. That's exactly what Zarahemnah and the Lamanite army are trying to do. Let's go and subject the Nephites. Now look at the contrast. Look at verse 9. Because Mormon is going to show you light right next to darkness, good right next to evil on the page many, many times. Look at verse 9. Now the design of the Nephites was to support their lands and their houses and their wives and their children, that they might preserve them from the hands of their enemies, and also that they might preserve their rights and their privileges, yea, and also their liberty, that they might worship God according to their desires. So in this struggle that's starting up, one is trying to take it away and another is trying to defend it. So now let's watch this. As Mormon now sets the stage for this first clash of these two armies, look at the description of how Captain Moroni, who is a type of Christ, is preparing his soldiers. And you can picture how Christ would have prepared the angels in heaven in that particular conflict. Look at verse 19, or the bottom of verse 18. He's given them swords, scimitars, all manner of weapons of war. And then verse 19, when the armies of the Lamanites saw that the people of Nephi, or that Moroni, had prepared his people with breastplates and with arm shields and with shields to defend their heads, and also they were dressed with thick clothing. You'll notice here, Captain Moroni has prepared his men with both offensive and defensive weaponry and protections. Look at the contrast. Verse 20, how does Zarahemnah feel about his men? What's the unspoken message to his men? Now the army of Zarahemnah was not prepared with any such thing. They had only their swords and their scimitars, their bows and their arrows and their stones and their slings. And they were naked, save it were a skin which was girded about their loins. Yea, all were naked, save it were the Zoramites and the Amalekites. Notice, you've got this huge army that more than doubles the number of the Nephite army, and you give them all this offensive weaponry, things that are instruments that can kill. And what do you give them for defense? Can you picture this long line? Line up, come through soldiers, and they get a government-issued loincloth. That's all they have for their defense. In contrast to what Captain Moroni gave his men, thick clothing and the breastplates and the arm shields and the helmets for their head. God sees people differently than Satan sees people. Satan's soldiers are there to destroy in order for him to get power, whereas Captain Moroni actually cares about his men, so he's going to defend them. I love this moment when you've got this huge Lamanite army looking at this less than half the size Nephite army, and these guys are the ones shaking in their boots, getting weak in the knee, saying, let's not go fight them, as they look up and down the line at all of this bare skin that's exposed, and they see all of the armor over there. Brothers and sisters, when we follow Christ, when we defend liberty, when we're using our agency, and when we are prepared, we shall not fear. Even if it seems that we're vastly outnumbered, it's them who live in a realm of fear. They're the ones who are filled with the shaking, and we're not fighting, so they retreat back into the wilderness. And if you look at the map, the internal map, they've been positioned down here in Antionum, and Captain Moroni's men were in Nephihah here, and they've come together and they say, nope, we're not fighting, so they back off and take the slower, rougher route through the wilderness to try to get over here to Manti to enter in, whereas Captain Moroni finds out from the prophet Alma where they're going and quickly comes over and hides his men in the near the city of Manti, and thus we're in place for the battle that's going to take place in chapter 44 when they come. Look at verse 30 in chapter 43. And he also, knowing that it was the only desire of the Nephites to preserve their lands and their liberty and their church, therefore he thought it no sin that he should defend them by stratagem. Therefore he found by his spies which course the Lamanites were to take. And then you combine verse 30 with verse 49. And it came to pass that they turned upon the Lamanites, and they cried with one voice unto the Lord their God for their liberty and their freedom from bondage. And they began to stand against the Lamanites with power. And in that selfsame hour that they cried unto the Lord for their freedom, the Lamanites began to flee before them. They recognize my arm, my armor, my best thinking, my best strategies, they're not going to save me at the end of the day. It's important. I have to have that in place because now I can go to God with more confidence, but the battle is the Lord's at the end of the day. And they turn to him, and then in chapter 44, you get this beautiful sequence where Moroni he doesn't delight in the shedding of blood. He's not sitting there going, kill him, let's be violent. He hates that part. He recognizes it as a necessary evil, if you will, to be able to defend the liberty of the people. But he hates the fact that he's having to kill people to do this. So he stops the battle, has a little interaction where he asks Zerahemnah to reconsider this war, and Zerahemnah refuses. He gives him the weapon, but says, I'm not going to promise I'll never come and fight again. And you get this intriguing sequence here where he rushes at Moroni to try to kill him. The servant of Moroni stops him, breaks his sword, cuts off his scalp, raises it up, at which point many of Zerahemnah's men say, okay, we're done. But the rest keep fighting, and he has them keep fighting until he realizes, okay, I am going to die. Okay, stop. Does that tell you how he feels about his men? This wasn't about them. It was about him and the other leaders getting power over the Nephites. It's a tragedy that so many lives have to be lost because of one man or a few people's thirst for power and their greed and their pride. So as Zerahemnah's army retreats and goes home down to the land of Nephi, or up to the land of Nephi as they would say it, chapter 45 is this little interim chapter, because 46, we're going to have major struggles start up again, this time among the Nephites themselves. Now, there's some internal struggles between Morianton and Lehi over here on the east coast of the land of Zarahemla. And then in chapter 51, you get the kingmen rising up, and they lose the vote. And so what do? They start a war. And Captain Moroni has to pull his men out of the strong fortifications to fight an internal war, a civil war, which now leaves all of our eastern seashore, all of those cities on the east, vulnerable and open because they don't have enough men to defend the fortifications. as well as the ones on the south, because we're now fighting a war in the center of the land. At which point, Amalickiah says, let's go. So he takes the men that are in his army, and look at chapter 51, verse 26. Thus he went on taking possession of many cities, the city of Nephihah, the city of Lehi, the city of Morianton, the city of Omner, the city of Gid, and the city of Mulek. And we already talked about the geography elements going on here and Bountiful in our little special segment that we did back with Alma 22 on Book of Mormon geography. So you can refer back to that for the rest of this story. I love the fact that Teancum is able to come in to this conflict before Amalickiah's men are able to take the city of Bountiful and the land Bountiful, which would have put a chokehold on the Nephites to be surrounded on the north, the east, and the south. So Teancum has this incredible fight with the Lamanite army, with Amalickiah. And notice verse 33. Think about what time of the year this is. And it came to pass that when night had come, Teancum and his servants stole forth and went out by night and went into the camp of Amalickiah. And behold, sleep had overpowered them because of their much fatigue, which was caused by the labors and the heat of the day. You would think, oh, this is clearly summertime. The Book of Mormon people are not using a Gregorian calendar like we do, January through December. They have their own calendar system. When is their calendar flipping to the new year? We don't know for sure, but it looks like it's sometime around the spring equinox because of what happens in 3 Nephi 8. It tells us that on the first month, 5th day of that first month of this new year, this huge tempest and storm and earthquake and all of these horrible destructions kick in at the crucifixion of Jesus. Well, we know that Jesus is crucified either on Passover or the day, one day from Passover. Passover is the first full moon after the spring equinox every year. So we know that the Nephite calendar, at least in 3rd Nephi, is flipping over sometime in the spring. Here it is, much heat of the day, and watch what happens. Teancum goes, puts the javelin in his heart.